This is The Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for you at the Hidden Killers Podcast and True Crime Today. This is Hidden Killers Live with Tony Brueski, Stacy Cole, and Todd Michaels.
Kada Scott, she was 23 years old. That is Kada right there. She worked in elder care, the kind of job that takes more heart than most people will ever give. She was harassed. She reported it. She said she felt unsafe. And the system let her die anyway. 2 weeks after she vanished, her body was found in a shallow grave behind a boarded-up middle school in Philadelphia. The man charged with kidnapping her, Keon King. He had already been arrested months earlier for stalking and strangling another woman. Why was he free? Well, that's what we're going to unpack today. The case had surveillance video, it had witnesses, it had enough to prosecute. But the DA, in their infinite wisdom, they dropped it when the victim didn't show up to court. Now DA Larry Krasner says, we could have done better. You think? It's not a lesson learned. That's an admission that the system designed to protect the public simply chose not to. Today, former prosecutor and defense attorney Eric Faddis joins us to unpack how this could happen step by step, from the decision not to prosecute to the lack of oversight to the total absence of accountability. Because until we understand where the system broke, we can't stop it from breaking again. Eric, let's start with the decision-making itself as we get into this one. When prosecutors have a prior kidnapping and assault case with video evidence, walk us through this, how this should work and how this did work. How does that even land on someone's desk and get dropped because one witness did not appear? Let's start there.
Sure, Tony. So, kidnapping charges are extraordinarily serious. And on top of that, my understanding is that there were some stalking allegations. Yeah. When I was a prosecutor, that was such a red flag that someone who's willing to go to those lengths to sort of predatorily prowl and seek out their victims over time with repeated contacts, that is a huge signal that something is wrong, that individual is capable of something horrible. When a witness doesn't show up, that's of course problematic, and sometimes the prosecution needs those folks to prove their case. That being said, there are measures that can be taken, including subpoenas, including going to the court and saying a person didn't appear on a subpoena. So there were red flags, and there were things that could have been done to try to further that prosecution. It sounds like they weren't done.
I want to understand basically the rules of the game here. If the witness, the person who is saying I am being stalked, and this person has there's there. We know what took place, what the charges are, but she didn't show up to court. Now people could go, well, she didn't show up, then you just dismiss it. Is that how that works? If the person does not show up, it just immediately gets dismissed, no matter what mountain of evidence may exist against the person that's being accused, that has the charges already against them?
Not at all. When we're talking about those kinds of cases, they sometimes they need the victim, but there are cases where you have other evidence. Like you said, there sounds like there was video evidence of what happened. Mm-hmm. You don't always need the victim's testimony. Even when the victim does not show up, there are measures that can be taken. In Colorado, if you've subpoenaed that victim and they don't show up, you ask for a continuance of the trial, and you have the judge issue a warrant for the victim. It's a harsh measure to take, but it's sort of a last resort to keep the case going. That could have been done. I don't have any evidence that was done in that earlier case that you're referencing.
No, it makes no sense to me. And I wanted to understand the ground rules first of, if they don't show up, does it automatically just get dismissed? Are we getting mad for no reason here? But what you're saying is Krasner, he failed. He had the opportunity to stop this person. He had the opportunity to continue pressing those charges, not dismissing them out into the ether. And it was a decision that was made. It wasn't some sort of policy or rule of how this works. It was a choice that was made by the DA.
From all of the information I reviewed, yes, it appears to be a decision that was made and not some sort of automatic legal outcome that was mandated for that witness not appearing. Like I said, as a prosecutor, you have to subpoena your necessary witnesses. And if it comes to the trial date and you don't have them under subpoena, you can request a continuance of the trial. In fact, you can request multiple continuances to get a witness under subpoena. If you've subpoenaed them and they don't show up, you can still request a continuance and a bench warrant to go out and have a fugitive team find that witness, bring them into custody, and have them present for the next trial. So no, this appears to be just a decision that the prosecutor made rather than some legally mandated outcome.
Stacy?
So my head just keeps shaking here. Like, is this part of a flawed system, or is this it's just a failure of one person? I mean, and that's a very broad statement to make, but I feel like, and Tony, we talked about this before we went live, like this just keeps happening over and over again. It feels like the system is almost set up for the perpetrator versus the victim. And it should be for the victim. You should be advocating for people who have had things done to them to protect them and to be there for them. At what point do we say the system is flawed? We need to do something better?
Sure. It is a pattern that has repeated, across the country in many criminal cases. And when we're looking at whether a witness shows up, that's a complex issue. There's a lot going on with that witness. They might have reasons they don't want to show up. They didn't ask to be involved in this court process. That being said, in order to ensure community safety and accountability for the alleged wrongdoer, there are measures that can be taken. And so I think it appears to be a function perhaps of sort of the prosecutorial outlook and mindset and strategy in some prosecutors' offices to, I guess, kind of move on from a case. They've got a ton of other cases they've got to handle. And so this one, hey, I've got a good reason to let it go. The witness isn't showing up. I'm going to hang my hat on that reason. And then lo and behold, something horrible happens, months down the road.
How often do things like this happen? Because I would think it might be kind of frequent, especially in situations where you have a predator, a perpetrator here, and then you have a victim that's been preyed upon, kidnapped in this case. And for those playing along at home, we're talking about the case prior to Kada Scott that could have stopped this from happening. So just in case you're confusing the two, we're talking about the one that happened before that the DA let go. When you have that sort of a scenario, I can imagine if you're the victim of this perpetrator, you might be a little reluctant to go into court, to be seen again, for them to see you again, to have to see them again. I mean, it's re-traumatizing in its own way. So you probably have quite a few, I'm going to guess. I don't know. Is it common where the victim will simply just not show up because for fear of their own safety, for fear of what the system may do, or whatever their reason may be, out of fear based on what that perpetrator did? And if that does happen frequently, how often is this the outcome where it's, all right, well, they didn't do their part, so we're not going to do ours, and we got, like you just said, there's a big stack of stuff over here we got to deal with, and they showed up and you didn't?
Tony, it's much more common than people realize. When I was a prosecutor, especially at the lower level, the county court level, where we're talking, simple assault cases, oftentimes the victim would be afraid of the perpetrator,
Sure.
would not want to go into court and provide evidence against that person. What if the prosecution loses? What if the defendant wins? He is then free, and this witness who testified against him is in the crosshairs. That being said, although that happens frequently, dropping a case of this magnitude is much less common. If we're talking simple assault, a lot of prosecutors will write it off and say, hey, this is a minor case, I'm going to move on to the next one. When we're talking kidnapping, when we're talking stalking, we're talking these sort of lethality factors that arise in the context of intimate violence and just male on female violence. Usually you go to the ends of the earth to try to find that victim and bring them into court. You request as many continuances as you need. You issue as many subpoenas as you need until the court dismisses it, rather than the DA unilaterally deciding, hey, we're not going to go forward.
Eric, as a prosecutor, Did you ever have a moment personally where you knew that dropping a case was going to put somebody at risk? And if so, what do you do? I mean, how do you sleep at night? And I don't want to throw it back on you personally, but there's a human element to this. There has to be. How do you deal with that?
Oh, sure. It's something that's always going through your mind as a prosecutor, because really your duty, in a sense, is to kind of shepherd this community and to make sure that there are no predators out there who are going to hurt the folks in your city and your neighborhood and your county. And so it happens all the time. In fact, when I was a prosecutor, there was a time where the defendant failed to appear and the trial had to be, it couldn't go forward. And I was walking around that courthouse and outside the courthouse looking for that person because I thought I saw him early on in the day. Sometimes you have to take it into your own hands and really go above and beyond to try to make these prosecutions go forward despite these hurdles. And I don't have any indication that the prosecutor's office made such attempts.
In something like this, I mean, if you are the victim and you don't want to appear, you're scared. It's ultimately a choice out of fear. And yes, the system has ways of compelling. You just listed a whole bunch of them, all the way to basically we're going to take you into custody and bring you into court. But I mean, that's almost like re-victimizing the victim in right. many ways. What sort of tactics or tools exist, if any, to compel a witness to come in and to feel safe on their own free will, to protect them and let them know, look, you are safe coming in, or do we very much lack in that area? Are we much more kind of nuts and bolts of they're not here, let's get them here by force, rather than let's get them here on their own free will because we are going to protect them and make sure they're safe from this predator that's in the same room as them?
That's one thing, Tony, that sort of soured me on prosecution and caused me to go to the criminal defense side, is because, yes, issuing a bench warrant for a victim, my gosh, if they've already been traumatized, then having to be taken into custody and booked into the jail and put into jail scrubs, and then testify against the person they're afraid of, that is horrible for that person. And so, you want a good victim witness team. You want to build that rapport. You need to keep the communication going. But what legal mechanisms do we have to protect that victim on the back end? If the defendant's sentenced to prison, well, the defendant is out of the community for a period of time. But usually it's not like they have to wear a GPS monitor for the next 5 years or something. And that victim is always going to be looking over their shoulder. And so that is really a disincentive for those victims to come in and testify. And really there are all these disincentives and not very many incentives.
You're just adding trauma on top of trauma. So how do you change the system? Can the system be changed to advocate for the victim versus the actual criminal?
It's an important question, Stacy. And, we talk about protective measures like protection orders. That really on its face is just a piece of paper that says a guy or a person can't contact another person. Those aren't always abided by, of course. We do have GPS monitors, and those can be helpful, but they are not an indefinite, they're not a permanent solution by any means. Different prosecutor teams have different victim witness advocates who can explain the process to the victim, try to make them feel comfortable. There are usually local law enforcement that are willing to do higher activity and surveillance in the victim's area as the case is going and after it's going on. But all that drops off at some point, and the victim is left with that fear that, hey, what have I done to this person, and what are they going to do to me now?
Is this another example of just how our system is so antiquated in every way, shape, and form that we think that this piece of paper is going to hold somebody back? I mean, the same way that we go, well, you signed your name on a piece of paper, that must mean everything. It doesn't, and it doesn't mean anything to these people. Is this something that just really needs to be rethought of in today's terms? I mean, yeah, there's GPS monitors, that's lovely, but then you're relying on that monitor going off when they're in the wrong place, and then you're relying on police getting to them before they commit some sort of crime. It feels like we operate like it's 1895 in so many ways. And look, these pieces of paper, they didn't work then either. but we keep doing them. We keep acting like they mean something.
Yeah, right. And on top of that, GPS monitors can be cut off. I've seen many cases where a person just cuts them off. And then now everyone's really scared. What is that person planning if they don't want to be tracked and they have an ongoing case? I'm not a huge proponent of like increasing oppressive bonds or something like that. But when we're talking about stalking, when we're talking about kidnapping, those folks are usually a danger to the community and should be the community should be protected until that individual gets a trial and is either acquitted or convicted. Here, it sounds like this person was just let out, which would be very uncommon in Colorado jurisdictions under these circumstances due to the gravity of the charges and the allegations in the earlier in time case.
When you look at the charges here, obviously they're pretty bleak. It's not like a light that's like a marijuana charge or something like that. It's stalking. It's nuts. It's kidnapping. What on earth? I mean, obviously this is just pure speculation, but what on earth is going through that DA's mind when it's on video that this happened? The victim didn't show up. You've been doing this guy was a defense attorney for a long period of time before he started becoming a prosecutor. He's not like new to this. You would think he understands a little bit about how victim mentality works. I mean, he was a civil rights prosecutor, a civil rights attorney for a while. You would think that someone of that mindset would have the grace, the understanding of a victim, and wouldn't be so quick to just drop a case like this. What on earth was going through his mind at that moment to think, oh well, let's just let him go? That's the part that baffles me. Other than I don't know, complete utter distraction of something else in one's life. It just doesn't make sense to me.
It is certainly puzzling. I think some critics will say that this is a function of what are called or would have been termed progressive prosecutors. And I think that prosecution needs to change. I think there needs to be changes in prosecution. On the other hand, we can't go so far in the other direction that we are overlooking obvious risks to the community, obvious risks to actual victims here. And yeah, when you have that stalking charge, that was one thing that was drilled into me as a prosecutor, is that is a red flag. That is a person you need to watch in this community, because they are hunting. According to the allegations, they are hunting other human beings in your community. And so the decision to just kind of let them go free and whatever, especially when it's on video, there are ways to prove cases without victims, without witnesses, when you have that other kind of evidence. And so I'm surprised they didn't try a creative approach, even perhaps a lesser charge. If they didn't think they could prove the most serious charges without the victim, there are lesser charges that can be pursued that could at least provide some safe haven for a period of time for that community.
Does fear of losing a trial push prosecutors to play it safe instead of playing it right in something like this? Meaning, well, this witness is already really reluctant. Maybe they have some knowledge of this and they really feel like, well, they're probably not going to participate. So why even spend my time on this? I mean, is it, I don't want to have this on my track record of, this didn't work out for me. This isn't going to be one that's going to look good on my record. So I'm just we're going to push it out here so it doesn't ding it that way. I mean, it's purely bureaucratic, but I wonder, does that exist in the system with some prosecutors?
Nearly every person has some degree of an ego. And for lawyers, that's like times 100. And even, especially for criminal lawyers, especially for prosecutors who are in the public eye, like Larry Krasner, there is certainly, I would imagine, a motivation to not want to have that L on your record, especially on a high-profile case. And so, if the case is dismissed, that's much different because purportedly that they couldn't get the victim's cooperation. That's much different than going to trial and actually suffering that loss. And so, sometimes prosecutors kind of cherry pick; they pick and choose which cases they think are strongest and most likely to lead to a win. And sometimes that's a valid approach, but yeah, certainly I've got to wonder whether those personal considerations could have contributed in some form or fashion to the decision the prosecutor made, and if so, that's probably not a valid factor on which to either dismiss or move forward with a prosecution.
Are there any checks and balances in this system where if you have a prosecutor that makes a move like this, I mean, could there have been anyone in that office that when these charges were dropped that said, wait a second, let's take a look at this again. This doesn't make sense. Or once that decision is made, that decision is made. And then there's no consequences for that decision for the person that makes it.
There's really no good legal mechanism by which such a decision could be challenged. If the prosecutors have what's called prosecutorial discretion, which really means, hey, they get to decide which cases they like and want to go forward on and which one they don't. And when they make that decision, the judge can't say, hey, I disagree with dismissing this case. I'm going to force you to move forward on it. You can see sort of the problems that could arise with that because of you're compelling a prosecutor to move forward on a case they don't like. They might not try that hard. It might not be a successful prosecution. But should there be some other kind of mechanism where the victim could petition the court, could ask for a substitute prosecutor? These are ideas that have been considered.
Is there ever a point where a prosecutor could face charges themselves for negligence in this case?
In many states, there is such robust immunity for governmental actors, including prosecutors, in the decisions they make, especially when it comes to their own discretion, because they're going to come up with reasons that sound valid no matter what. Typically you can't sue a prosecutor. Sometimes they'll try to sue police departments for not pursuing a crime or a person that they had evidence against. But even those are really difficult to win. I think there's a problem with how broad prosecutorial immunity is. And I've actually sought to try and change that in Colorado. But that's a work in progress across the country.
Man.
Do you think there would ever be progress on that? I mean, obvious, you're kind of like it's an uphill battle, I would imagine, to try and fight that one, because I would, anybody in that community certainly, benefits from that protection, and rightfully so in many cases. You don't want just a bunch of frivolous lawsuits going against prosecutors that somebody disagrees with for grounds that make no sense. But at the other side of the coin, you have these sort of situations that go on every day. What is the solution? What is the healthier middle ground, rather than just constantly swinging way over here or way over here, when reality tends to be more in the middle?
It's a tough issue to navigate. One thing that's come about recently is trying to impose some kind of accountability on prosecutors' discretion when they are grossly negligent. And that includes whether they go forward on a case that's bogus or whether they choose not to go forward on a case that is legit and then something horrible happens. They've talked about possibly having attorneys' fees and costs be imposed against prosecutors when they go forward on a bogus case. And I'm just wondering if there's some kind of corollary on the reciprocal, where they choose not to go forward on a serious case and then something bad happens. Hitting the pocketbook is always can move the needle. You can get traction there, but really those ideas are in their infancy, and legislatively that there is just not much of a political appetite for that kind of thing.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast. Is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
There are two kinds of failures in public office. The first is human, the occasional mistake that comes with doing a hard job. The second is ideological. When you believe in a theory so strongly that you keep applying it long after it's proven not to work. Let me introduce you to someone who's doing just that. Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner. He's crossed that line more than once. He isn't just a man who made a few bad calls. He's built an entire prosecutorial culture that protects violent offenders more than it protects their victims. And the results are written in blood. Let's start with the most recent case, the one that we've been talking about, the one that finally forced even Krasner himself to admit, yeah, we could have done better. Yeah, you think? But that silent reflection, don't bring her back. Because you know you could have done better before you did it. Those 5 words came after 23-year-old Kada Scott vanished from a nursing home shift earlier this month. 2 weeks later, her body was discovered in a shallow grave behind an abandoned Philadelphia middle school. The man charged with her kidnapping, 21-year-old Keon King, wasn't a stranger to that office. Earlier this year, he'd already been arrested for stalking, kidnapping, and strangling another woman. Prosecutors had surveillance video showing the attack. They had evidence. They had the chance to stop him. When the victim didn't appear in court, even though all of this was on video, all of this was documented, you don't even truly need the victim to be in court to be re-victimized, having to stand next to the perpetrator of these crimes, the predator. When she didn't appear in court, Krasner's team dropped the case. No conviction, no follow-up, no preventative measures. Just, nope. No thoughts of considering, gee, maybe this person is fearful for their own well-being. Nope, even though we have you on tape doing these horrible things, aren't 50-second chances lovely? Go ahead, keep going. Keep going. We believe in the power of healing. You ignorant fuck. 2 months later, Kada Scott was gone. That's not hindsight. That's negligence with a calendar. And this isn't an isolated failure. It's a pattern. It's one that's been documented again and again during Krasner's 7 years in office. Under his watch, the conviction rate for violent crimes in Philadelphia has plummeted, dropping to roughly 33%, according to a 2022 Philadelphia Inquirer analysis. Police arrest people, prosecutors cut them loose. And violent offenders keep walking back into neighborhoods already drowning in fear. The city's commissioner, Daniel Outlaw, that's her name, Outlaw, has called it a revolving door. Officers risk their lives to make arrests, and the DA's office lets the same offenders out before the ink dries on the paperwork. And we all know the Philadelphia DA's office is filled with lovely individuals who always do their job well, like Ellen Greenberg's case. Oh, wait. Oh, now he's the governor. Huh. Funny how that works. And when they reoffend, the pattern is depressingly predictable. In 2020, then U.S. Attorney William McSwain publicly accused Krasner's office of leniency in at least 10 violent crime cases where defendants later committed murders or serious assaults. You can argue politics all day long, but you can't argue with the funerals that followed. In 2019, Officer James O'Connor IV was shot dead, killed during a raid. The suspect, Hassan Elliott, had a prior illegal gun violation and was free on new drug charges that Krasner's office had chosen to drop. Same story, different victim. Then there's the gun violence crisis. Despite record numbers of gun arrests, the Krasner era has delivered fewer gun convictions than any administration in recent memory. The Inquirer found that defendants charged with illegal firearm possession were being convicted at dramatically lower rates, even as shooting soared. These aren't low-level marijuana cases. They're gun felonies. People arrested with illegal weapons in a city already breaking homicide records. Krasner's office has argued that these declines reflect complex cases and witness cooperation issues. Sure, but every DA before him faced the same problems without watching the conviction rate collapse by half. What changed isn't the evidence, it's the ideology, which should probably be called ignorance. Krasner came into office as a civil rights defense lawyer, not a career prosecutor. He ran on reform, reducing mass incarceration, eliminating cash bail for nonviolent crimes, undoing decades of punitive sentencing. On paper, it may sound noble. In practice, it has turned Philadelphia into a social experiment where the lab rats are real people and they're getting killed. There's a difference between mercy and neglect, between giving people a second chance and giving predators a free pass. Krasner's policy buried that line. He promised to focus on rehabilitation, but his office can't even handle basic supervision of repeat violent offenders, more or less rehabilitation. He promised to prioritize justice, but his prosecutors now drop nearly half of all felony cases, a figure reported by the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. That's not progress. That's called paralysis, dipshit. And every time someone like Keon King slips through, the response is the same. Regret without reform. I'm glad you can say, we could have done better. That's more than most. When impressed about the earlier kidnapping case, Krasner admitted his office should have moved forward with the video evidence. Oh, you think. Translation, they had enough to prosecute. They just didn't. He even said keeping King behind bars could have made all the difference. Could have? It would have. This isn't about politics, it's about competence. And if you strip away the campaign slogans and activist talking points, you're left with a DA who talks like a defense lawyer, even when he's supposed to be protecting the public. Krasner's defenders love to say his critics are fear-mongering, but numbers don't lie. Philadelphia has endured record homicide counts in multiple years under his watch. And when your conviction rates for violent crime sinks to a third, you don't get to call that reform. You get to call that failure. And here's what makes it worse. Krasner's known it's a problem. He's acknowledged mistakes before, but words are all we ever get. No internal audit, no disciplinary action, no change in procedure, just another press conference and another soundbite about lessons learned. Meanwhile, the city keeps learning those lessons the hard way. It's time to stop pretending this is about political labels. This isn't progressive versus tough on crime. This is about a DA who forgot what his job actually is. The duty of a district attorney isn't to balance ideology, it's to enforce the law that protects the public, period. And when an elected official keeps making decisions that let violent people back onto the streets over and over again, that is not reform, that's reckless indifference. Ask the families of Officer O'Connor or the loved ones of Kada Scott how much comfort they find in Krasner's theory of justice. Ask the neighborhoods where gunfire is a nightly soundtrack if they feel empowered by fewer convictions. Ask the police officers still risking their lives why they should keep arresting the same suspects when the DA's office keeps waving them through the revolving door. At some point, this stops being a criminal justice issue and becomes a moral one, a common sense one. Because if you know your policies are putting people in danger, if you can draw a straight line from dropped charges to dead victims, and you still do nothing to change it, you're not just failing at your job, you're complicit in the outcome. That's where Philadelphia is right now. And that's on Larry Krasner. Says we could have done better, but he hasn't. And people keep dying while he figures out how. Your thoughts in the comment section on YouTube. Search Hidden Killers at Tony Brueski. You will find us there. You can also find us wherever you get podcasts. Do that same search, Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. We are going to stay on this case. We are going to keep exposing corruption in power. And if you want to help us, please do. Hit subscribe, share this. More people need to know this is going on. And the only way to do that is by you sharing this. Because the algorithms, guess what? They're more about protecting the predators than they are about the people. They are. The algorithms out there, they don't like icky words. They don't like people exposing this sort of shit. They don't. To start sharing. And let's take the power back. I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.
Board, who was ultimately, I think, dismissed from the civil case. So they're trying to get creative, and this is yet another bizarre wrinkle to the school shooting, pandemic that we have in our country, and yet another problem that we have to try to solve as part of this larger problem.
This seems like a simple one. Don't be a dumbass. I mean, if somebody is telling you, there is a child, they have a gun. We think they have a gun. Maybe they have a gun. We're not quite sure. There's something questionable that child has. But the school did an act. And I also question this. And I'm not blaming the teachers who did what they were supposed to do. They had to go to the vice principal and say, okay, we think this. What on earth is going on in our country where if you're the teacher and you think the child has a gun, that you can't be the first one to go check out that bag? That somehow that child's rights supersede you going and saying, let me see your bag. This is where we live right now, where a teacher is in fear of repercussions towards them for acting in a manner that could protect not only that child, but all the other kids around and themselves, because there could be repercussions. Well, you might be violating their rights. You might be doing this. You might be doing that. This is insane. I mean, it's adults running around in fear of the rights of a 6-year-old who might have a fucking gun. I mean, what planet did this become normal on, and how the hell did we get here?
There is sometimes a departure between constitutional jurisprudence and common sense, because what we have here is, I think perhaps the concern by the teacher was that the child does have a Fourth Amendment right. It is less of a Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures than they would have outside of the school. They have less rights, but still some rights. And the school, if it's a public school, then they're state actors. And so they're kind of thinking to themselves, perhaps, hey, I don't want to violate this kid's Fourth Amendment rights and then be stuck with a lawsuit. But gosh, you got to weigh the potential evils here. And the other evil is that somebody gets shot in a school, which is happening with alarming frequency increasingly. So there is sort of a tension between, hey, we want to make sure we're protecting rights, but then again, what about this common sense piece? What about this emerging problem in society? Should the Constitution and its jurisprudence kind of catch up to that? I think is a question a lot of people are asking.
If we go into a concert, if you go into any sort of busy place, they will check your bag. I can't go, you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights. You can't check my bag. You just have to trust me that everything's going to be A-okay. Why on earth? How is this not applicable in a school setting?
So I think the distinction that the school would say exists is that, at a concert, you're talking about private entities, private individuals, and no one has a Fourth Amendment right against private individuals trying to search your shit, but you do have a right against public entities trying to search your stuff. So in the school context, the Fourth Amendment applies, whereas at a private concert with private entities, it doesn't. I'm not saying that that's how it should be. I'm saying that that's how the current jurisprudence is laid out. And even though those students have a diminished right in against searches and seizures, there are still some rights there. But should we be empowering teachers to be able to take direct action on a serious lethal threat that could be imminent? I mean, I think the answer is of course. And so we've got to sort of make some legal changes to authorize that.
Well, and one of the things that they said, and I did some research on this, the district said that being shot isn't a normal teaching risk. I would like to argue that because
it isn't.
344 shootings since Columbine, that pushes that into the level of it is a risk. It's something that we've been seeing. I'm not going to call it a trend, but I'm going to say that, well, it's more than one. So it's a possibility. Yep, you're saying there's a chance? You're damn right there's a chance.
Yeah. No, Stacey, I'm totally with you because, and I think if you ask nearly any actual teacher, one of my best friends, Joey Cohen, is a teacher, and you better believe that goes through his head
damn right
regularly. And so to say that this isn't sort of a normal work hazard of being a teacher, I think is detached from the reality of this, I will call it an emerging trend in school shootings that we're seeing. Okay. And like the last 24 said, maybe in the 80s it might have been different, but 2025, this is the reality.
Well, how did we go from we're going to be really vigilant, we're going to keep all the kids safe, to, well, you all have these rights and we don't want to hurt your feelings? Or, I mean, it's insane. After Columbine, I was a senior when Columbine happened. I know you're a few years younger than me, Eric, but you would have been in school too when that was going on. Yeah. So you lived through being in the education system for many of the years after that. I got the fuck out, thank God. But it was disturbing. But we didn't care. Nobody thought, well, my rights are being violated, they're going to check my backpack. But they started checking everybody's backpack. You walked in the building, it was like walking into an airport for a little while, where they're checking shit, and it was just the norm. Nobody was like, well, my rights are being violated. What the hell changed where this was just common sense, where we're going to make sure that this stuff is being checked so nobody gets hurt, no harm, no foul. But we're now at a place where we can't even look in a first grader's backpack to make sure there's nothing dangerous in there. I mean, that basically says right now, my daughter going off to school, all these kids come in with their backpacks, teachers have no right to look in them no matter what, even when they suspect there might be something there that's dangerous because it might violate their Fourth Amendment right?
You know, I hear you, Tony, for sure. And the way that I would sort of suggest is the Fourth Amendment protects against, it doesn't protect against all searches and seizures, just seizures that are unreasonable.
Right.
And my God, isn't it reasonable if you've received warnings that this kid might have a firearm and there's all these school shootings happening, to go in and search that kid's backpack? I think it's absolutely reasonable. And even if the school district has certain policies and procedures in place, there should be exceptions that allow them to deviate from those in the event of an emergent potential situation like this. So I don't think there would have been anything legally wrong with the teacher searching the bag. I understand they were trying to adhere to protocol, but sometimes you got to adhere to common sense.
Well, and this is a chance where this is a time where that actually failed. So if they were saying, well, we were trying to, preserve the child's rights, well, you fucked up. I'm just going to say that. And this teacher is probably sitting there going, well, you know what? I give up. So at some point, we've got to come into the middle that, you know what? Tommy, we think has a gun. We're going to pull him out, take him to the counselor's office, not make a scene, not embarrass him, but we're going to check out this perceived threat and see what's going on. We need to get back to this point where we're protecting other people. I'm sorry, I'm just on a rant. I'm getting mad. I'm getting really pissed.
Then we sit and we wonder, well, why is it hard to get teachers? Why do we have bad teachers?
We're not protecting them.
And there's plenty of wonderful teachers, but when you create an environment for healthy, intelligent adults that is going to be insanely risky, that is not going to work with them to help educate the children. It's going to work against them at every turn they take. You're going to end up with bottom of the barrel folks applying to be teachers. And
you're
the good
going to be
ones
safer Tony, you're going to be safer working at a Starbucks drive-through taking latte orders than teaching our next generation of kids.
And making more money. Yeah.
Correct.
And that's the sad reality of our education system. Again, something we do nothing to fix in this country, a glaring red problem. And we're just like, well, those teachers. Like, no, that administration. Because 99% of these problems start with the administration operating out of fear of being sued. But maybe that's part of it, too. I mean, and there are plenty of times to sue a school district. There certainly are. But but we also then get to the point where we're just solely operating on fear of lawsuits and not fear of children being killed.
Right.
And we're just not going to take the appropriate actions and hope that everything turns out good at the end of the day. And that seems to be how this went in this case.
Yeah, totally. And to Gen Z 367's comment, being a teacher is so difficult at this point. They're constantly being scrutinized and ridiculed and condemned. And there are these parameters set on how they can even instruct their given discipline. And on top of that, think about is to teach anybody anything. I'm trying to teach my brother how to change something on my car, and he's an adult with a master's degree. That's hard as heck. Think about teaching a bunch of teenagers, ancient history or something. And so they have a hard enough job as it is, and now they have to deal with a lethal threat to their lives and perhaps being handcuffed in their ability to respond to it.
Yeah,
big problem.
They are, and that's the insanity of it. It is such a broken system, and that's why it's getting harder and harder to find good teachers out there. And the good ones a lot of them have left. There's still several standing, but there's very few. I'm in my early 40s, and I can tell you, of all the people I knew from high school that went in, just like this woman did here, who went in and got shot. You go in rosy eyes, wanting to do the right thing. Thank God we have people who are willing to be teachers and put up with children and have the patience to put up with these children, and the horrible parents that are out there of these children and deal with those repercussions and still try to provide guidance. Thank God they exist. But at some point, there is a breaking point for every one of them. And I can say I'd probably 80 to 90% of the people I grew up with, again, I'm only in my early 40s, have left teaching because of shit like this, because the administrations are not using any sort of common sense, because it is so set up basically to operate out of fear and to not truly educate the kid and to make sure that they get certain scores in certain places so they get their funding. And I get it. You need your funding. But I mean, there's so many things messed up. I could go on and on and on about how broken our system is, where, I mean, especially with funding, like, okay, well, you have the worst scores. Let's give you the least funding. Maybe that should be a sign they need more funding because they need help, not less help. But that's how our system works. The schools that have the best scores, that end up having the best teachers because they have the best pay, end up getting tons of resources and tons of money. And the schools that are struggling, it's like, oh, you're down, let's keep kicking you. That's how the United States education system works. That's why we're in the problem we're in today. That's why we have the young adults that we have today. Poor decision makers, because this is the system they came up in, the system that fostered it. This is not a broken system. This is how the system is designed to work right now. It's our job to say, this is broken. We need to change it. It is currently working as designed. And that, I think, is something nobody wants to accept, because it takes some courage, it takes work, it takes effort, it takes energy to change something as difficult as this whole thing is.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think, funding is a huge issue. I think sometimes even political overreach in education on both sides can be a problem. I think some of those ideologies can sort of try to be infused into curriculums and into resources that students have and may no longer have. It can result in the students being less accommodated, having a slanted view on certain issues. And sometimes when there is not enough support for these students, especially those dealing with issues due to funding, due to politics, due to whatever reason, that contributes as well to the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's an endless cycle, and it's like, okay, well we fix this, but we got to fix. I mean, look at our conversation. It's like, yeah, well if we did this, you still got this over here, and this, and then it just becomes, And at the end of the day, what do you do? And then and we're paying our teachers unbelievably low wages. I mean, shockingly low wages. I've seen some of the entry-level salaries just around here. We're talking like 19,000 on some positions.
Again, Starbucks work in the drive-thru.
Less
I'm not
than.
dissing Starbucks drive-thru.
That's like you make more panhandling outside of Starbucks, probably.
Yeah.
Honest to God. And then we want you to, we want to entrust you with the well-being of our young people. And it's not to say that somebody, very well-intentioned, that money, I'll live in poverty because I believe in what I'm doing. Yeah, they will for so long. Mm-hmm. But then even, you've been there a long time when you get up around the scale and you're still not high. You're still not in many districts.
New people that are taking over the senior people's salary. Yeah. It's repulsive.
Broken. It is so broken. It is so repulsive. And again, everyone is living in fear in every school district. Every person who has a job, they are living in fear of doing it wrong. And then they end up making the wrong choices because of that fear that they're living in. I experienced it just the other week where I got a call from my school saying, hey, we found this out. Your daughter reported this. And just to let you know, we let these other parents know what she found out. And that's it. Like, you're a mandatory reporter. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, I am. So what does that mean? Well, it means we have to report and you're calling the parents? Yes, we're just going to do that.
That's not reporting.
I'm sorry. Let's back up for a moment here. Mandatory reporter. What does that actually mean? What does it mean? And are you going to call? Well, we normally, yeah. So I blame and I don't blame people for those sort of decisions because there's a reason that there's a hesitancy to report certain things. Typically because something the administration said to them, because they don't want that bad mark on them. They don't want that bad PR. They don't want to be looked at as this. They don't want to be looked at as that. And that's how you get this fucking cycle that goes on forever. Look at the Devil's Den case. I mean, look at how they basically shuffle teachers around in so many districts like they do Catholic priests that molest kids. I mean, it's so freaking broken. It's insane. And it's an icky subject, so people don't like to talk about it either. But we did, and I'm glad we saved the world today. And,
I was going to say, did we fix anything?
No, but hopefully we opened up some people's eyes that didn't realize just how broken this shit show is. Eric Faddis, as always, thank you for coming on. Defense attorney, former prosecutor, Varner Faddis Law in Denver. Thank you so much for coming on, as always, Eric.
Great to be with you.
All right. Until next time, for Eric, Stacy, and Todd, I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.